Lee Forster here, MMP Lackey, with another episode of Metal on Metal, this time talking about the new SCS game that's up for pre-order, Rostov 41. I'm going to talk a bit about the scale and scope, show you a bit about the forces involved, go over briefly the special rules in this SCS game. All CS games tend to have, hopefully, a limited set of special rules that makes each one of them unique. A quick look at the force scenarios, and then I'll talk about what I like about this game. First of all, if you look at the counters here, the units range from battalions to divisions for Russian cavalry, Soviet cavalry, but generally you're looking at regiments for the Soviet infantry units, and you're looking at battalions and sometimes regiments for the Germans. This dot here means it's a two-step unit, so you'll see that the Russian infantry, rather than in sort of beefy divisions, is coming in very fragile regiments. And the Germans as well have some durability with two steps. It depends on the unit, of course. Recon such as this does not. A quick look at the terrain key, and the terrain will show you nothing too surprising for anyone that's played an SCS game, especially those that have to do with the war in the Soviet Union. If you look over here at the terrain effects, one difference here is that road movement is very fast relative to normal terrain. So that puts a special emphasis on the roads and tracks. Also, city does not give too much of a defensive benefit in this game. Villages, to me, are interesting. There's no effect normally on movement or combat, but you can't overrun into them. So they do provide a little bit of benefit to keep the Germans from running over the villages in the beginning of the game. There are 14 turns in the campaign game. There are 4 scenarios in total. Some of the scenarios are 4 to 7 turns long. This is not a long, drawn-out game. You'll see here, too, that there are 3 major periods of the game in terms of weather. It's clear weather in the beginning. This is when the German forces are advancing pretty quickly. Then the Rasputitsa kicks in sometime around turn 4 or 5, which will slow everything down to a crawl and very much slow down German progress. And then eventually it will clear up, and I guess there are 4 phases. This is the beginning of the freeze, when the mud gets frozen over. And then there's the deep freeze, which really is the very cold temperatures that start to affect the German forces and supply in particular. Here is the map. Yes, one map. That's it. One counter sheet. This is the opening of the game, turn 1. You'll find the Soviet forces deployed along a rough line here, and the German mechanized forces with some infantry ready to try to punch through and take Rostov. There is a defensive line along this river at first. I'm not sure how to say it in Russian, Mus or something like that. And the first couple turns will find the Germans expanding relatively quickly through here. The game does have initiative. You roll for initiative, so you can get those back-to-back turns. You who play OCS games know all about that. So that leads to the first few turns being pretty wide open, and the Soviets have to decide, are they going to try to stand at the river or just run from the very beginning. Here is a look at the Axis forces. You'll see motorized. This shows that they're capable of exploitation movement. Most of the Germans, most of the Wehrmacht forces can do that. They do have some infantry, especially in the north, tagging along. The game does have artillery units with a very standard role to disrupt a hex and possibly cause some step losses, although step losses in this game aren't too heavy. You can see some of the forces involved here, including some Czech units. With the Soviets, you get more. Lots of small infantry regiments, one step, pretty fragile, but some of them do come back during the game. They're reconstructed and reformed, so you do get a bit of the zombie horde feeling where the Germans are advancing, and then the Soviets keep building up. But most of them are one step. Some armor units you see here, and the Soviets really have to keep these safe and save them up for important use, and the cavalry units are particularly useful in this game. They're pretty heavy with 2 steps since they're divisions, fairly mobile. They do okay during the mud turns. The Soviet artillery is pretty minimal, a few units, very slow, but they can play a key role once the forces sort of get into a stalemate with each other. As I mentioned before, the game has initiative. If both sides roll for the initiative, and the difference with a single die is how many airstrikes the initiative player gets. So air will switch from turn to turn depending on who has the initiative. German air is a lot more flexible. You can use it to bombard almost during any point in the game. So they can use it even during the Soviet movement. So this can be quite frustrating to the Soviets and the Soviets will tend to be fairly conservative in what they're doing if the German has the initiative and has some air points saved up. Germans also have 2 barrage phases. They can barrage before movement or after movement, and the Soviets don't have that. The 4 scenarios included, you see here the turns, 1 to 4 for the very beginning. It's a very fast game. You can probably play that in 90 minutes once you get used to how the game flows. Then we have a scenario that starts with the German historical progress up to turn 7, and they try to take Rostov and survive that. This is the Soviet fun scenario where they could take all their stuff and try to push the Germans back, and then you have the whole campaign game. So, what do I like about this game? I've played it for a couple years now. It's one map, low counter density. I play it by mail, email. It's very fast. I can do a turn in 5 minutes, so maybe 10. So it's really nice that it's a quick game if you don't want to have something, suppose like a Day of Days, which doesn't play quite so quickly. The weather patterns, so the switch from mud, or switch to mud, and then back to sort of a light freeze, clear weather, and then the freeze creates a rhythm in the game, which is nice. It's not every turn the same. German air and arty flexibility give you some tactical things to think about that you don't have in every SCS game. You have the asymmetrical forces of highly mobile, small, compact German force against a pretty massive but fragile Soviet force. And I think there's a lot of good replay options in this game. If we take a look at the map coming up here, you've got 2 major theaters. You've got the north and the south, and the German player has to figure out, am I going to commit a lot up here? Am I going to go down here? Are we going to push for Rostov full gun and try to take it and keep it? Are we going to play a safer game of trying to whittle away at the Soviets and wait for an opportunity? The Soviets also get to decide how fast and especially when they're going to move over to the offensive, because the Germans have quite a bit of sting, and if the Soviets attack too soon when they're not quite ready, a German counterattack can really ruin your day. I think it's a great game, and this is a good addition to the SCS, especially for those of you looking for something lighter, something you can complete, something that's not as massive as, say, Stalingrad Pocket 2 or some of the bigger games. I think it's a nice situation. You've got things to think about for both players. I want to encourage everybody out there, you guys who like SCS games, go ahead and pre-order this and let's get this out. That's another quick episode of Metal on Metal. Next up will be a replay that I'm currently playing of this game to sort of show you how one particular instance, one particular playthrough of the Rostov went.